This is episode 30, by the way. We've made it to 30. That's a big number, I feel like. I didn't think we'd make it this far, Josh.
For us, it's pretty good, I guess.
Yeah, so we're taking a break from our normally scheduled content to talk about Satanism. And that's something that Josh and I have been wanting to do for a while, but we wanted to find a guest that might have more information and understanding than we do on it. And so Josh did some searching and found Father Justinian. And so, Father, why don't you just introduce yourself to the audience and tell us, what you do, and then we can get into the topic.
Yeah, so my name's Father Justinian Burnett. I'm a priest at St. John Cassian Orthodox Chapel in Bessemer, Alabama. We're a representation parish of the Monastery of the Glorious Ascension over in Resaca, Georgia. And I've been a priest now for 3 years and been running this mission for 8. So we're I've got a lot of young convert men, a lot of people who previously were involved in occultism. I myself used to be. So it's been good for me to be able to have that to draw on to sort of talk to some of these kids about this stuff.
Wow. So awesome. You actually have like a significant number of people in your congregation that have been through this?
This is something that really, guys, I mean, like one of the things that's like you can look at historically when societies are like going through a decline, there's always an uptick in occult activity, in magic usage, witchcraft, all those things. I mean, like you can go back to the end of the Roman Empire and see that, like, in the years leading up to like the fall of the Roman Empire, and its conversion to Christianity, but in those like last years of paganism, there was like this huge like uptick in sorcery, necromancy. There's a lot of like of ancient grimoires that come out of that time period. One of my favorite saints is Saint Cyprian, the former sorcerer, who literally was like an occultist and like the premier occultist of the ancient world. He's relatively early, I think second or third century saint, but he actually was friends with the devil, and worked magic spells and stuff. I mean, his parents gave him over to like pagan priests when he was a child to learn, how to summon demons, how to talk to them, how to make them do things. And when he became a Christian, he literally spent like his vast fortune that he had accumulated through like selling his occult services to people, buying back all of his books and destroying them.
Wow.
So I, sometimes feel like, it's not there. There's an example here.
Yeah.
Jeez, yeah, really. Makes me think of the Ephesian people.
Do you think that, we're kind of talking about Satanism specifically today, but, you mentioned that when times get tough, people start searching for something to kind of give answers or give comfort or whatever. So is Satanism specifically like one that people are particularly drawn to, or is it just kind of in general? Because I know there's a lot of New Age and things out there too. That
I think we have to be basically aware that like all of these things are satanic. And that, that's whether that's like your coffee barista who's like wearing the neo-pagan Wiccan amulet and talking about like her Wiccan rituals, and all the way up to like somebody who's like deep into like, Aleister Crowley, Thelema, and somebody who's like a theistic Satanist. I mean, like all of this stuff is a delusion of Satan, and all of it is stuff that he's using. And it doesn't really matter like what skin you put on it, whether that's like Norse neo-paganism or which I know some people in that world too still. It doesn't really matter. You got to remember that we're talking about like, Satan is the father of lies and deception, and he really doesn't care like what you believe in or what you call it or what as long as you don't believe in God, or as long as you hate God.
True.
Yeah. So,
but I guess you guys were wanting to talk specifically kind of about like theistic Satanism, like people who like worship Satan as a deity.
Right. Well, that's kind of the question. Go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I was thinking like, the Church of Satan, you always see them like on the news or like talk shows or whatever. Like, we don't really believe in the devil. We're just, we're atheists and we use him as a symbol and it's theatrics. And I don't buy it for 1 minute. I mean, they can say that all they want, but I think it's a front. I mean, I think some of them might believe that. They might not believe in a devil, but kind of like what you were saying, whatever.
That's oftentimes the hook, is that you want to get people, like very few people like get to like go straight from like, I was raised in a vaguely Christian milieu to straight up I worship Satan. Like almost everybody, myself included, passes through that like, well, I'm just an edgy atheist phase.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that you got to remember about the reason why people get involved in magic and witchcraft and the occult and Satanism is because they feel powerless in their own lives. And they feel like the world is like spinning out of control around them. They have no control over anything. And so they latch onto something that makes them feel powerful. And they're, my spiritual father, Archimandrite Maximus, he's the Archimandrite, that's the abbot of the monastery of St. Dionysius up in Long Island, New York. And he told me one time, he said, Justinian, the church doesn't forbid magic because it doesn't work. It forbids magic because it does work.
Yeah.
And like, you realize that like, you look back through like the history of like early modern occultism, right? So you see like in the Renaissance, there's like this huge, upsurge in occult knowledge. Most of the sort of demonology and grimoires and magical grimoires, stuff like that like still exists, come out of that time period. At least the oldest ones do. And that continues all the way through like early modernity. But like the dirty secret that nobody wants to talk about is that the very people that we hold up as like, early scientists, up to and including people like Isaac Newton, were actually involved in the occult. Like Isaac Newton has as much stuff written about alchemy as he did about physics. So there's like the reason that people get involved in this is because it does work. And it's like it's in some ways a scientific worldview. You do ritual A and you get B. At least for a time. I mean, that's again the hook. These things you think that you have control over it because you do this and you get that. But the reality is that you're being manipulated and played with. Right, and eventually you get too deep into the rabbit hole and you end up doing terrible things. I was an acquaintance, the late Tracy Twyman. She was the editor long time ago of an e-zine called Dagobert's Revenge. But she also got like much deeper into occultism, and we sort of had a similar trajectory for a while, and then I veered off another direction. But she passed away about 5 years ago, and that's actually one of the reasons why I decided to do this interview, is because I was thinking about Tracy a lot actually lately. And I had listened to one of her last interviews on a podcast that she had done. And she sounded so desperate and so horrified. And she actually said on there, I feel like I made a terrible mistake, but I'm in too deep to get out.
Wow.
And that's one of the reasons why I agreed to do this was that, the thing I tell people, it's never too late to get out. You can always get out. The reality is that, demons are powerful. Satan is powerful. He's real, and the demons are real, and they have like real authority in this world. Yeah. But ultimately, Jesus Christ is more powerful, and that's the demons are terrified by the sign of the cross. Like they literally will flee. I mean, and you think about like in our tradition, it's not this seems like a silly thing, but actually like demons can't even stand like that. So they actually are powerless in the face of Jesus Christ. And even the image of his cross is enough to terrify them to leave you alone. And I've had some experiences on both sides of this that are pretty wild.
Yeah. How did you get into this, and what has been your experience with it?
As many terrible things happen to kids who grew up on the internet. And, it was in that first generation of people who had access to, to dial-up modems and the internet, actually sort of before the internet, even in like dial-up BBS services. And one of those that I was hugely active in as like an 11 and 12-year-old. I mean, that's like how terrifying it is,
Mm.
was people who, it was like a vast repository of occult books, grimoires, the manual for the Golden Dawn. Israel Regardie's like a big compilation of the Golden Dawn ritual books.
Mm.
Aleister Crowley's Dilemma, all of his book. Oh gosh, Moonchild.
Oh yeah.
Was one I was reading that at like 12, which is like stuff you should not happen.
Jeez.
So yeah, like that, you start reading this stuff and you start realizing that like, oh, this stuff, it's not just that it sounds cool, it's that it's like provable. You can like do stuff and things happen.
Mm.
And it's just curiosity. It starts off sort of as curiosity. And then you just go sort of like get deeper and deeper into it. And the more you put into it, the more weird stuff you go seeking out.
Mm.
So, I mean, like, I had read, like, by the time I was out of high school, I was like, sort of deeply reading stuff like Iamblichus is on the Chaldean and Egyptian mysteries. Huge fan of the late John Anthony West and his sort of gone on a deep dive. I even tried to learn like some French to be able to read his like inspiration is a guy named Schwaller de Lubix, this French mathematician and occultist who wrote all kinds of stuff about the Egyptian mystery religion and trying to recover that through his studies of the temple at Luxor and at Karnak. So I was pretty deep into that kind of stuff. Hermeticism, the golden tablet or the emerald tablets rather of Hermes Trismegistus. I mean, this was like all stuff that was on my library shelf. Virgin of the World, all that like really like ancient like esoteric Western occultism. I was a huge fan of Charles Williams, one of the Inklings. And I know a lot of people, talk about Lewis and Tolkien, but Charles Williams was like the other wheel of that tricycle, and he was deeply involved in all that stuff. I mean, I've got like one of his books here. I actually probably should have gotten it off the shelf to show you the actual passage, but he has a talking point in a book of his called The Image of the City and Other Essays, where he talks about like he couldn't even sit down to like write unless he had performed a rite known as the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram in a room. And for somebody who's an ostensibly Christian author, this is kind of odd stuff to be seeing. It turns out that like Tolkien detested him because he was like this weird occultist. So it's interesting to see like their dynamic, But these were both people who were like friends of Lewis, C.S. Lewis's, and like huge sort of influences on him in different ways.
Wow.
So yeah, it's I was like hugely into his work because he seemed to be somebody who had like this deeper knowledge. And among occultists too, you'll find that like the scary thing is you actually will find occultists who will graft themselves into certain Christian traditions. Because they can, it's a very Gnostic view. They see like the outer like public doctrines of Christianity are for the masses, and then like these more esoteric doctrines are like really for those of us who are like more intellectual and more spiritually enlightened, can practice these things. You see that a lot with specifically a lot of 19th century occultism stuff. The Golden Dawn people, a lot of those people were like that. They were like deeply in the Church of England. Most of these people were. I mean, it's Charles Williams was a lifelong member of the Church of England. But they nevertheless were like involved in this stuff and saw it as really like a sort of deeper, more esoteric knowledge that gave them like a better understanding, I guess, of like the spiritual world. Mm. But my experience of it was that I got really deep into like the sort of ancient mystery religion stuff. I still keep my ear out, for that stuff in that world. Like a lot of these people still sort of around and talking about stuff, and a lot of the stuff that I was into is now like commonplace. You were talking about earlier about the like Satanists like wanting like chaplaincy rights and stuff. There was that statue of Baphomet that was like on that. Oh, I can't remember what state it was in, but it was like on the Capitol grounds.
Iowa.
It was in Iowa, yeah.
That's one of the
Iowa
articles that I have pulled up here. I was going to ask you about that, but
yeah, the Iowa of all places, like Middle America. There's like it's like corn country. What's somebody that put up a statue of Baphomet there, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is that, I was just a country kid growing up on a farm in rural Alabama. And, it wasn't exactly difficult to get to this stuff. I mean, the internet was in its infancy, but like, in the old days, the internet had like lots of stuff on it. I used to scour Project Gutenberg for like, medieval grimoires. Um,
Oh wow.
yeah, because all that stuff was available. Google Books, the Google Books
Mm,
repository has tons of this stuff,
mm,
and it's actually out there and available. And if people don't realize that their kids have access to like all this stuff.
mm,
I mean, rightly, people are concerned that your kids have access to pornography, but
mhm.
your kids also have access to like some actually deep esoteric Satanist stuff,
Yep.
and that which is just as destructive, if not more so.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is, like I said earlier, it's something that's kind of spooky and under the radar a lot of times, so people don't even think about it, like you're saying. Porn and all that is very mainstream, and so yeah,
Well, Ryan, I mean, I encounter people all the time. I'm in a a very there's a decent sized Orthodox community here, but we're definitely a minority. And I come in contact with Protestants all the time who were like, "Well, yeah, but witchcraft isn't real. That's all made up." And I'm like, "No,
right,
no. let
yeah,
me disabuse you of that. No, it's real.
Right.
Like this stuff is real, and like people get involved in it, even if they start out playing with it. And I think a lot of people, um, I myself used to, you dabble first, and then you see that it works, and you just keep going.
Mm,
But how many people? I mean, like I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but how many people like play with Ouija boards, and then like you know weird stuff happens, and they just keep going down that rabbit hole. I
right.
mean, like this stuff that seems innocent and like and harmless or like silly or made up. It doesn't really matter to the demons. It doesn't matter that it's silly or made up.
Hmm.
They will entice you however they can.
Right. Well,
yeah,
it's even creeping into like, and I say it's creeping in. I think it's kind of always been there. It's just starting to show itself more now. I think, um, in like the entertainment industry, in fashion.
Mhm.
We did a thing about Balenciaga, which is this house of fashion or whatever, and it, even their clothing is like deeply satanic. And who just did the? I think it was
are you talking
Taylor
about the
Swift. They just had like a huge thing on Taylor Swift on Twitter. It was like this that she had this live show and all these people were dressed in black robes and they had red lights and they're all in a circle. I mean, it's just very satanic looking.
It's,
Um,
very eyes wide shut, but on
exactly,
prime
exactly,
time.
exactly. Um, yeah, and
Yeah, no,
so
well, this stuff is becoming more prevalent and it's becoming more acceptable, and that's
right,
that's something to really be concerned about. Um, the the reality is that a lot of that stuff people don't realize like how human beings are actually like programmed to respond to imagery and symbolism. Like it's deeply part of our makeup, and this kind of stuff is not like it's not just like dress up and pretend. It's not just that they're actually like programming you to see certain images and to respond to them. And I mean, a lot of magic is like psychic manipulation, and you can actually manipulate people based on what they expect to see, and then what you project to them to see. I mean,
kind of
this
like
is like
MK Ultra.
it's very MK Ultra. Yeah,
yeah,
no, these of course those guys in the CIA in the '70s like were
They
dabbling in all this stuff.
perfected it.
Yeah, they really did.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter Levenda. Have you ever read any of his stuff? Like, he's
Mm-mm.
like a guy who, it's an interesting guy. He was a CIA asset and also a fake Orthodox priest.
Wow.
wow,
Yeah. Also the author of I don't know if you've seen the like the book The Necronomicon of Simon. This it's like a chaos magic text. He's actually the author of that.
Wow.
We're talking about my old friend acquaintance Tracy Twyman. She's actually going to track that down and like proved it, because she's like got the like found like returned like cash check stubs from like his royalty checks from it.
Oh wow.
wow, that's
Because he
crazy.
denied for years that he was the author, but like no, he
Uh,
turns out he totally was. But yeah, it's a CIA asset.
hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think are you familiar with the Lord of Spirits podcast?
Yeah,
Andrew
I
and
know those
Steve?
guys.
Father Andrew,
Yeah,
and
I mean, it's a small world. We all kind of know each other.
Okay, yeah. Well,
we love that show.
We're big fans of them. I stumbled across them. Josh and I kind of got into some of this stuff reading Dr. Michael Heiser's material about the unseen
Hmm.
realm and all that. And in studying Nephilim and Genesis 6 and all that, we got to Lord of Spirits because they addressed this kind of material, and they have several episodes about idolatry. And what I think is interesting that they pointed out is lines up exactly with what you're saying, that idolatry is basically just a form of finding a way to control something. There's something out of your control, so if we can localize a deity and perform a ritual, we can control the weather or
Hmm.
control whatever the outcome of a battle. And
power.
people in the modern day don't realize that some of the things that we see on TV or that we do, just like you said, Ouija boards, or it might, no matter how innocent it is, when we try to take control for something, when we perform some routine or some practice, and we see it as a input output, that is a form of idolatry, and that's basically what you're describing as what Satanism is, and some of these occult practices. It's very like you said, you can predict it, like it works, and
Yeah,
and
it's
I think
just
that's
magic.
what's really shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, people are. I think that this notion that, like, like witches and stuff like that, like that's not real. So it's not something to worry about. Like, actually
right.
sets people up for failure, because no, it actually is real. And like when you like, you don't have like a robust understanding of it, or like a theological explanation for it, then it makes, it in some ways makes Christianity look stupid. Like, you don't, it's like, oh, well, if you don't have an explanation for this thing that I can clearly do, then, obviously your belief system is ridiculous. And
Right.
for me, that's exactly where I was. I mean, it was like pretty hardcore anti-Christian for like a long time. And I guess what sort of brought me out of that was a couple of things. The end goal of Satanism, and that's, whether you're practicing like some silly New Age stuff or Wicca or whatever, neo paganism. The goal of all of this stuff is for you to like make yourself into a god. You try to like, it's an apotheosis. Your desire to become a god, which is exactly what did Satan tempt Adam and Eve with in the garden.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's literally that, this notion that I, of my own power, can, absorb enough or enough knowledge to become a deity, and so I, at some point in my early 20s, I had to like recognize and admit to myself that I had neither the competency nor the experience to be a god. And that we could like easily look at like how my life was shaking out to like prove that I obviously was not divine. So it was sort of propelled me on this like source for this like quest for truth. One of the questions you guys like had me sort of thinking about was like, how did I get into Orthodox Christianity? Well, let me tell you, I did not intend to land here.
Yeah.
I got to be friends in college with my classics professor, Dr. Frank S. Russell. He's a faithful Catholic and a really, really good guy. He's a really decent family guy. I mean, I love him dearly. We're still friends. But he like really challenged me. Like, he's like, you think that so you think Christianity's dumb, but like, what do you know about it? And so it's like challenged me to read like some of these people from like, the early first century, some of the early church fathers and stuff. And one of the things that like grabbed my attention was the works of Dionysius the Areopagite. I know a lot of academics like refer to him as pseudo Dionysius, and there's all these like theories that it's not really the disciple of Saint Paul that's mentioned in Acts 17.
Sure.
There's been a recent book that came out actually that sort of debunks all of that though, and like it shows that he's pretty authentically first century. But like it blew my mind to find out that there were books written by people mentioned in the Bible, like just sort of in passing in the New Testament, that still exist.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in a world where that was like a thing that anybody knew about or talked about. So I'm reading like this stuff by Dionysius the Areopagite, the divine names, the celestial hierarchy, the mystical hierarchy. And I was like, it was like mind blowing, because I was like, oh, like this is this guy actually sort of knows what's going on. And the other thing that got me was I started like digging through some Orthodox stuff because my again my Catholic friend Dr. Russell um, would talk about like he's an academic, he studies classics, he spent lots of time in Greece, and as a Catholic he would just wander over to Greek Orthodox churches in Greece, and he has like some Sicilian ancestry, so it's like that in his background too, and he would basically talk like longingly about like how beautiful the Orthodox Church was and like how there all these disagreements between them and Roman Catholics. And if we were
Right.
he's like if Roman Catholics are being honest, we would say that like the first millennium church really probably looked more like them than it does us. And so I mean all that stuff got me thinking. So I started I just sort of read past him and went back another the 1,000 years. And but I encountered very quickly a sort of modern Orthodox elder. His name's Father Seraphim Rose. He gets pretty well known now, but there's two books by him that I read like pretty early on in the journey. One was called Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, which has a very like terrifying icon of the apocalypse on the cover, and the other was called The Soul After Death. And because I read those books like in tandem, I honestly can't tell you what's in one and what's in the other one. But this like it struck me that like these people have a comprehensive knowledge of like what's going on in the spiritual world, and that it like fully explains like and has some context for my own like personal experiences. So I just sort of kept reading and kept reading and kept digging, and eventually just decided, yeah, I think this is it. Like I think this is where I got to be. And what was funny was, my parents were Protestants, through and through. They had done like the whole the sort of evangelical independent church sort of movement in the 90s, and some stuff had happened, and they were like really burned out. And I don't think my parents were going to church anywhere at the time. But I remember I read Orthodoxy and Religion of the Future, and it had like highlighted and marked up all these notes in the margins, and I mailed it to my mom and was like, read this.
Oh wow.
And then 3 years later, like my whole family converted to Orthodoxy.
Wow.
I got one sibling that's not in the Orthodox Church, but the rest of us, my mom and dad, my other sibling, yeah, we all ended up in the Orthodox Church. And then I spent several years. I was trying to do this like academic thing for a while, and then I was actually writing a master's thesis on Dionysius the Areopagite, and I ran into like this like really sort of thorny issue with my research. Couldn't sort of make my argument work, and somebody told me I should get in touch with the monks at the monastery of Saint Dionysius the Areopagite in Long Island, New York. That the abbot there, Father Maximus, was like an expert on the works of Dionysius. So I got talking to him. So I was explaining, my master's thesis and the sort of aim of my project and the argument. He's like, yeah, I think I see the problem. It's that you're wrong. So I was like, oh, okay. So that's how I got to know him, and we this like long, fruitful relationship. He's been this huge mentor for me. Ended up attached with his monastery, and eventually being ordained a priest and serving under him at this chapel here in Bessemer. But like that's somebody else that had this like we had this like long like back and forth about like this stuff, because again he's like clearly, like I told you at the beginning, like the church doesn't forbid magic because it doesn't work. It forbids it because it does.
Right.
And people get seduced in it because it does work and it doesn't require faith. It requires you to like. There's no faith involved in magic. You're literally like doing a ritual to get like a result.
Yeah, you do step 1, step 2, step 3.
It's no different than reacting baking soda and vinegar and making it foam.
Yeah.
It's on a basic level that's what you're doing. It requires no faith for that to happen. So, but it gives you like the illusion of like power and control and like some sort of knowledge of the spiritual world, and but it's literally the only real goal for that is to just get you sucked in and draw you away from God and make you hate God.
Right.
Yeah.
What are some of the rituals that you performed? How far did you get? What did you see and experience that like really made you go, oh wow, like this is crazy?
Yeah. So I was in college, so early years of college, early 20s, late teens, early 20s. This was like around, this is like 2002, 2003. And, I had my own little ritual space, my apartment set up. I was, this is what I came in and did. Um, and, I was deep into cartomancy, using like tarot cards for ritual purposes, and not just like divination, like, like reading tarot cards, like, oh, I'm going to, meet someone tomorrow. There's a whole like other element to cartomancy, of like actually like using those things as images to project things to happen. It's like a two-way mirror almost. Like, you can look in it this way, and it's like, oh yeah, to see what's going to happen. But the other aspect of cartomancy is using those things as magical egregores, those images that you feel as like a psychic container that you fill with energy to like project out into the world to make something happen, right? And also, I think I alluded, to the fact that I was, reading some of these grimoires and stuff. This the Golden Dawn ritual book, and also like Aleister Crowley's Dilemma, and was like actually like doing some like minor summoning rituals. And one night I had this like things went bad wrong. I was in the living room of my apartment, and had this encounter with this with what was a demon, and it scared the absolute crap out of me. And I realized that like I have made like some serious mistakes.
Oh boy!
Because one of the things that you like you read in like occult literature is that never call up something that you can't put down. And it's like, well, that seems like a pretty decent warning, except when you realize that you actually can't put down anything. So yeah, so this is so but from that time on, I was like, okay, I got to get out of this, and I got to figure out something else. And so I started.
So did you see something, or did you feel something, or hear something?
It was an all of the above. I mean, like I've described it before as like you ever watch the old Disney Fantasia?
Oh yeah.
There's like the demon scene with like the demon on the mountain and all the stuff flying in the air, all the ghosts and stuff. It was like that. I mean, that's the nearest thing I can like describe it. And like this feel of like just crushing, like soul crushing dread and fear, and really like it's anger and hostility and malice. Like it was just like if there was like a way to like see like maliciousness incarnate, it was like that, and just to feel like this horrible presence of just like oppressiveness. And so I immediately was like, okay, well, I'm done with this. But it was like another year before I actually was received in the Orthodox Church and was baptized. And from the time that like that happened until then, I was like haunted by this thing. I literally, I was reading all this like monastic material and stuff about like what to do with like demonic appearances, and so I was like ignoring it. You just ignore it. Don't give it any attention. Don't give it any power. Like just ignore it.
Right.
Say your prayers, do what you got to do. But like if you like pay attention to it, the more it's going to do. What it's going to do. So, but yeah, weird stuff happened. I the month after I moved back to Alabama and was like going to the Orthodox Church, I was going to burn like my card deck and all this stuff. And, you practice this kind of stuff. There's like, people have like, it's like the demonic version of a patron saint in some ways. Like there, it's like, there was like one particular like, card in the deck, the tarot deck that like was sort of my card, it sort of felt represented me, and, so I actually burned like my tarot deck, burned all that stuff. And, I mean, I watched it like, burn up to ashes. And the next day, that card was sitting on my dresser in my bedroom.
Oh, wow.
And that happened like three more times.
Jeez.
Yeah. And like the last time I, on the advice of the priest that, brought me to the church, I sent me home with some holy water. He's like, burn it and then pour this all over the ashes. Like,
wow.
And never showed back up. I was like, yeah, that's something. But yeah, like that was like it was in some ways a good lesson for me that not to be prideful about this. There's like you as a human being, we actually have no power over them of our own.
Right. Right.
Um, the Bible tells us that we were made a little lower than the angels, and of course the demons are fallen angels, so they retain all of their like the powers and properties proper to their natures.
Mm.
They're just perverted and inversed from their like natural orientation to God.
Right.
And as a result of that, because God actually loves and has special care for human beings who He created in His image, they hate us. Like, and that and like now having context for that, like that feeling of unbelievable dread and like malice is just that, yeah, they actually hate us.
Mm.
And so, yeah, like that, it's serves as a good reminder sometimes to remember that, like, I can't do anything. It's not I that live, but Christ that lives in me, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the thing that I have to do is to, I have to decrease so that He can increase, so that this stuff can't affect me.
Mm.
How long were you practicing that before you realized like this is bad, I should get out?
A solid 10 years.
10. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I think I was actually, I told Father Maximus one time, I was like 12 years old when I did my first like occult ritual,
Goodness gracious.
and by the time I sort of transitioning out of this in my early 20s, but like that all happened when I was like 21, something like that.
Well, it makes me think of the another thing in the news that's come up a few times lately is the after school Satan clubs for schools. Where these Satanists are coming in and they want to do Satan club.
Yeah, that's
Whatever the heck
another
that is.
that's another one of the news articles that actually I think I texted it to you, Josh. But
Yeah.
at the I think this was in Iowa as well.
Dude,
There's
what's up with Iowa? Something in the corn, bro.
Somebody needs to go pray for those guys. But
Lord have mercy.
there's something. The only information I have is that it's called a school chaplain bill, and so they're in front of a committee. There's a guy that's representing a Satanist group, I guess, and in this video clip, he is saying that they should not pass this bill or that they should remove it. I don't know which way it's going. He's saying that it's a violation of separation of church and state, but that if they choose to continue with it, that he's more than happy to engage with the children in schools, basically using that as a threat. Like, if you allow religion in schools, I'm going to go in the schools. And it really just, it kind of makes me wonder, like, so Christians obviously are evangelical or evangelistic because, we believe Jesus died for everyone and everyone needs to be reconciled to the Father and brought back into the family and forgiven of sin. And so we have a mission. He gave us that: win souls and make disciples. What are Satanists trying to accomplish? Is there some grand mission or?
Well, I mean, like the goal is to prevent people from being reconciled to God. I mean,
Yeah.
like, there's an icon in the Orthodox Church that we use to sort of describe this. It's called the ladder of divine ascent, and you see like there's down it's like rooted on one end on earth and the other end on heaven, and you see like Christ up here at the top of it, and you see like people trying to climb that ladder, but what you see on the other side of it is like there's like demons with like grappling hooks, like pulling people off of it or shooting arrows at them, trying to pull them down off of it, because that's what they want. They want us to be in hell with them, because of course they hate us, but they also hate God, and they hate the fact that He loves us. And so the only way to get back at Him is to like, see, we can make them hate you too.
Do you think that the people that are involved in Satanism and are doing those things, are they intentionally trying to distract or draw people away from Christianity, or are they just totally blinded by delusion and manipulated?
I mean, Ryan, it's a bit of both. I mean,
Okay.
there are always people who are, what did Lenin call them? Useful idiots who follow along, who are just, it's cool, it's fun, or they just like have their own like agenda for, whatever it is they want to do. And they see like Christianity as being repressive or somehow oppressive to whatever it is to what I want to do. Right. So they seek out, occultism, New Age. This is what all these things have in common, like that New Age, occultism, neo-paganism, and outright like theistic Satanism all have in common is that they exalt the self.
Right.
Aleister Crowley's great motto, right, is do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Yeah.
But then there are, of course, like the people who are like deeper into it, and the people who are like in charge of these groups often. They literally do want to evangelize. I mean, they want to corrupt people, and that's both covertly and overtly. I mean, like what we were talking about before, like the imagery in the news media and stuff. Like all of that is in some ways like covert, like pre-programming. Getting people to see these images because kids are watching this stuff too.
Yeah.
Right.
Seeing these images, seeing this, and then of course like that, you think about that stuff, and it like creates this this sort of pattern of recognition in the mind, and then people can play on that, in the same way that like it's sort of like an inverse of like people humming some hymn or something, and like that sort of causes you to remember Christ, remember thinking about religion, like the proper religion.
Right.
But it works the same way. Like our consciousness, the demons have been like they've been like case studying human beings for like 6,000 years now.
Yep.
They pretty much have a pretty good understanding of how we work and what makes us tick. So they they do these things. I mean, the Orthodox Church has this notion of like what they call logismi. It's like little thoughts, and that they they'll project these things into your mind. They'll like these like intrusive thoughts that people talk about. Like it's like a real thing. Like demons will like throw a thought out to see if you'll grab onto it and start thinking about it. And the real discipline of the church is to like be able to recognize those for what they are and reject them immediately. Because if you start thinking about them, well, now you're thinking about sin.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you think about it, the more you're probably going to rationalize yourself into doing it.
Yeah. What's the Ryan? What's the Amazon cartoon that's being advertised? Amazon has a new TV show. It's a cartoon. What's the name of it?
It's called Has Been Hotel, and the premise is the main character is the daughter of Lucifer and Lilith, and she's portrayed as this sympathetic character that's trying to liberate humanity, and
it's basically the Luciferian doctrine. It's
of course,
God is the bad guy, Satan's the good guy.
Yeah. So this I found this article about this Amazon series the same week that other thing in Nevada was going on, and that's when I told Josh, like, we got to do an episode.
We got to talk about this.
This is crazy, and this is actually the second series. Hulu had a series a while back, or I'll say a while back. I think it's still on. I don't remember the name of it.
Oh, the girl that had got impregnated by
right.
the devil.
It was basically the same plot. It was the daughter of Satan, and so this is a show you can watch, and it just has a plot, and she's the main character, and it's just in your face.
Isn't it curious that it's always like these? It's like this female character who is like the liberator, right?
Yeah.
And this this goes straight back to Genesis 3. I mean, what happens in the Garden of Eden is that the devil induces Eve to usurp Adam's place as like the priest and king of creation. Because what does she do? Is that she takes of the tree, and she partakes of it, and then she gives it to Adam. Like this is like an inherently priestly activity.
Right.
We take of course I'm not talking about my own experience, my own tradition here, but we take of the bread and wine. We offer it to God. We partake of it, and then we give it to the people.
Right.
This is like read that, and it's like an inherently like automatically that's it's like a priestly action, but it's a total inversion of the hierarchy that God sets up.
Wow.
She's now over him, and and Adam's sin is that he and his apathy just goes along with it.
Right.
So why do you think that like sort of the most ancient sort of pagan religions that we know about, it's always female chthonic, like underworld deities, and it's always connected to serpent worship.
Yeah.
That's like not just in like Semitic cultures. That's like literally all over the world. So like for me, like especially like coming to grips with like like Christianity is real. Seeing that like no, this stuff like has echoes in literally like all cultural anthropology and like all cultural mythologies like around the world. And the only real explanation for that is that it all comes from a common source.
Yeah, and actually, maybe this is a good time to kind of interject this. I wanted to ask you about Lilith, because there's kind of this like a Venn diagram of like feminism is on this side and Satanism or occultism is on this side, and she's like the hero of these modern feminists. And so, where does she come into that? Is that like a
Well, there's all kinds of like Jewish folklore around like Lilith as I think probably the most that like a lot of Christians have exposure to her is like there's this like brief throwaway line in like one of the Narnia books about like Adam's first wife or stuff,
Yeah.
which is like literally like Jewish folklore sort of grafted in. But the reality is in the occult world, like Lilith is like the female aspect of Satan. Because if you look at the Baphomet, like the image of the Baphomet, that's an androgynous figure. That's a male. It's a hermaphrodite. It's a male female figure composite. And when you're talking about like this like feminized aspect of the devil, like that's Lilith. And there's all kinds of like ancient Near Eastern like stuff that around like Lilith, the killer of children. She's you'll see like a lot of modern people trying to like explain that away by like, well, there's a way of explaining like sudden infant death syndrome.
That she steals the breath in the night and all that.
Yeah. But the reality is that most likely what was going on there is not like some like explaining away like people dying in their sleep, but like this is a precursor to like to child sacrifice and Moloch worship.
Yeah.
Because these things are always together, like always together. Like we focus a little bit too much on, I think sometimes, like these specific instances of like Moloch or something. But we got to realize that like all this stuff was very fluid in the ancient world.
Right.
I mean, there's a reason why like this kind of like religious syncretism was possible in the ancient world. Why like Greeks going to Egypt could recognize in like the Egyptian gods their own gods.
Yeah.
You start to see like Hermes identified with Thoth, for example.
Right.
So yeah, this stuff is very fluid because all these people are being influenced by one another. And we have to keep in mind that like Christianity is in that same milieu too. Like Christianity does not exist in a vacuum. Like it has a heritage. And it has like there's like lots of interaction with like the pagan world that it came out of. Right. And so like a lot of times I think sometimes people are like afraid of like saying that there's, any sort of Hellenistic influence in Christianity. And it's like, no, like that's why would there be? Why should we be afraid of that? Yeah. Like that these people like talking about Dionysius the Areopagite. I mean, here's a guy who like a very educated first century Greek. By his own accounts, we've got some of his letters still. By his own accounts, he studied like, what we would consider like a university level education in Alexandria, the location of the Great Library, which was the repository of all of the wisdom of the pagan world. But not just the pagan world, because Ptolemy is the reason why the Ptolemy and his Great Library are the reason why that the Hebrew scriptures exist in Greek. The commissioning of the writing of the Septuagint was so that he could have a copy in Greek in his library.
Right. Yeah.
So people were conversant with this stuff. People were conversant with like Hebrew wisdom in the Greek world, and so like that's why you see like these connections that are made. But then you see that like in the second century, you see somebody like Clement of Alexandria saying that this was providential, because this like prepared people to accept Christianity. Because if Christianity was like a vacuum sealed like thing sort of walled off that just emerges out of Second Temple Judaism, then how on earth would it have appealed to like all these like vast different cultures? The answer is like by the time by the time that Christ came in the fullness of time. You had like a common intellectual and linguistic culture of people who were interested in, like, as the Greeks were, in like in wisdom and in mystery religions, you know, and those two things go together. I mean, like we oftentimes think of philosophy as being sort of like an egghead intellectual pursuit of positing, like, intellectual stuff, because that's what like modern philosophy is. But the ancient philosophic schools were like schools of behavior. They had like prescribed ways of life. They all, Stoics lived a certain way. Pythagoreans lived a certain way according to a certain ethical and moral and religious code. So in that sense, the idea of and you see this like in somebody even earlier, like Justin Martyr, right? Who talks about like he like went around to like all the schools trying to find like the best way of life, and he ended up a Christian. Mm-hmm. Because the Christians had had a prescribed way of life, and it actually like was like the best way of life. Yeah, I think sometimes like people are too afraid of this stuff for the wrong reasons. I mean, if you feel like you wall yourself off from it, then you don't have to deal with it. But you do have to deal with it, because these people are, to sort of tie this back to where we got to this conversation. These people are definitely like after your kids. They want your kids exposed to this stuff, and they want to ask you questions that you don't have answers to.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they do have answers.
So I have a theory, and Ryan and I have talked about this before. So when here's kind of where I get the idea. So Satan takes Jesus and shows him, in the temptation, he shows him the kingdoms of the world, and he's like, if you bow down and worship me, they'll be yours. And that, that's paraphrase, but it made me think, okay, he's got control of these kingdoms somehow. And I think it goes to idolatry. Do you think, speaking about America, and I'm sure that across the world, elites, people in power in governments, do you think that there is satanic element to that, and that's why maybe they're in power and steering us in a certain direction?
Well, yeah, and there's, of course, that, I mean,
and I know that
yeah.
People are like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, but I think there's truth.
Well,
to it.
here's the thing that people like don't understand, and that's that there's always all these conspiracy theories about like the Freemasons, and they go back to the Knights Templar, and that goes back to like to this and that. The reality is that the people don't realize is that there doesn't have to be some sort of like continuously existing like secret cult. All you have to do to be in contact with like to sort of be in sort of a diabolic communion with like those ancient mystery religions is to just get in contact with the demons that inspired them then. They're still around.
Right.
That's the organic connection. There doesn't have to be some like, you don't have to like go through and prove that there's been some like vast multi-century conspiracy of like a single group of people that's like moving through all these different societies. You just have to have people in each society who are like in contact with the same demons.
Right.
Bam, there you go. There's your group.
Exactly. Yeah. So do you think that it could be possible? I definitely think it's possible that some of our like, elite people are magicians or warlocks or
absolutely.
And that's how they gain maybe influence and people
absolutely.
in the music industry and stuff like that. You always hear about like selling your soul to the devil to be in entertainment and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of truth to that in some ways.
Oh no, I 100% agree with you. That's definitely a thing, and you see that like there's always been a sense in which the wealthy and powerful have been involved in this kind of stuff, because for a variety of reasons. I mean, like if we talk about the Renaissance again, it was sort of chic to have your like sort of pet court philosopher and your pet court magician and your pet court alchemist. These people, we look at these people like Paracelsus or something like that. These people like existed because they were like wealthy patrons. And I don't think that anybody's like naive enough to believe that, it was just like some sort of lark for like wealthy people to like throw money at somebody who was like, doing like occultist stuff because it was fun.
Yeah.
No, they were doing it because they were expecting to get something out of it.
Right. There's power
You
there.
know?
Yeah.
Right. You expect to get something out of it. It's like a return on investment. Like nobody's just like giving people money because they want to like go try to turn lead into gold.
Right.
There's something else going on there, and it's that these people expected to receive like benefits or favors or power from like this sort of secret master.
Yeah, and where do you see how the church? Because you mentioned before, how some Christians are like, oh, well, that stuff's not real. It's like, where did that despiritualization come from? That Christians were like, oh, that stuff's not real, and it's like, bro, like your Bible is full of that stuff. I remember like Pharaoh having his magicians like work magic right in front of Moses, and
Well, Josh and I have talked about this before, that I think everyone thinks that psychics and mediums and all these things are just like watching Sherlock Holmes, where he's just really observant and really clever and sleight of hand.
now you have some of those people, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think, yeah,
We've grown comfortable with the idea that like all this stuff is just a big con.
yeah.
And maybe the big con is that there are enough con artists that to give cover to the real stuff.
Yeah, or maybe the the
Misdirection,
influence.
huh? That's the classic.
Yeah. Look over here. The influence of like naturalistic humanism, which I think is coming to
Absolutely.
an end. I think that's definitely coming to an end.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, like, so I mentioned earlier about reading Father Seraphim Rose.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I know is in Orthodoxy and religion in the future. He wrote that book in 1977, and one of the things that he said toward the end of that book is that we would see in the coming decades a convergence between the realm of like the paranormal and like ufology, the UFO like contactee movement.
That's big. Yeah.
And like, well, like in the 70s though, like both of those things were big, but they were like separate. They were like separate phenomenon,
Mm.
You had like the Warrens doing psychic investigations and stuff like the Amityville Horror House and all that stuff.
Right.
And then you had like, the Hills with their like, contactee stories and like aliens and all that stuff. And, and of course I read that in like the early 2000s. And then like come like the 3 or 4 years leading up to like the 2012 Mayan apocalypse nonsense, like what was on TV constantly was like Giorgio Tsoukalos and Ancient Aliens, which is literally like this like convergence of those exact two things, right?
Yeah.
And so now what I see like in that world, because I do sort of still keep my ear to the ground on some of this. What you see in that world now is like them talking about how like aliens aren't actually like, because the distances involved in like space travel would be so far that like they're not physically here. They've learned to like astrally project themselves here,
materialize in our realm.
And so they're sharing human consciousness to contact us. And I'm like, so bro, you've just described demons.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's
There's a word for that.
We already know about that. We already know about like extraterrestrial consciousnesses projecting themselves into our reality.
Right. Yeah.
That's we have a robust understanding of that actually.
Yeah.
That's another thing, the UFO. Yeah, that's interesting, the connection between maybe the Satanism, occultism, and the UFO phenomenon.
It's like all connected.
Yeah, we've discussed that before, that you can show statistically, it can be measured that places that are higher in occult practice are also higher in UFO sightings, and people don't catch that for some reason.
Literally every single time you can map where there are like UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings, and like plot where there are like known like house hauntings and stuff like that. Like it always goes together, always.
Wow.
Yep.
Because it's all manifestations of the same phenomenon, and people are interpreting it based on their own interpretive framework. So if you reject like a spiritual orientation to the universe, then like what's aliens, or it's like cryptid monsters, it's Bigfoot or Chupacabra. But no, it's just demons.
Right. That's the agnostic atheist version of a demon.
Yeah. No, because like Josh just said, that sort of like secular humanism era is like definitely coming to an end, because again, it's kind of like, I just, sometimes have described like being an atheist, like it's a nice place to visit, but you can't live there. You have, it's like so insufficient. And even like people who like claim to be like atheists, they're not atheists. They just hate God.
Exactly. Right.
Like there's no, you just, somebody asked me one time, like, how would I answer like the atheist who says that, well, there's like humanity has like, thousands of gods. Like, well, how do you know yours is right? I'm like, because that's the one you hate.
Exactly. Right.
You're not spending your time out there telling me that Shiva doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah, there does seem to be a big target on Jesus's back specifically.
Yeah, it's strange how like all of you go after like this particular religion. I don't see anybody out there like telling me like not to believe in the 1,000 Hindu deities.
Right.
Nobody's
that goes back to like the God of this world is directing that stuff toward Christianity.
Yeah. Well, that's the target, because you don't fire at something that's not the target.
Right.
Even if you don't hit it, you're still firing in that direction.
Right.
Yeah. I'm curious, what would you recommend from an evangelistic or apologetic standpoint to people who may encounter someone who's into Satanism or some form of the occult or New Age or whatever? I mean, what do you say to someone like that as a Christian? What would compel somebody to come out of that?
I would say that in my experience, it's in some ways it's like dealing with addicts. You can't reason and argue them out of it. The thing that we have to do as Christians is remember that, like, this sounds like a platitude, but the most powerful thing in our arsenal is prayer. One of my dear friends, like when I was first coming to Orthodox Church, told me this, that like, God absolutely respects our free will. He lets us do what we want to do. Not that shields us from the consequences of it, but he lets us do what we want to do. And if, just like in the gospel lesson about like, going to the land of the Gadarenes, right? They asked him to leave and he left, but when we pray for people, we're giving God an excuse to get involved because he also respects our free will, and we're asking him to get involved on this person's behalf, and he will, And so the most important thing is to remember that that prayer is like the most powerful weapon in our entire arsenal, because that's literally like our connection to God.
Yeah.
And that if somebody in our life is like being seduced by this stuff, I mean, I know myself well enough to know, but people who tried to argue with me, I would just double down.
Yeah.
You can't argue people out of stuff like this. It's just impossible, really. I mean, any more than you can like argue somebody out of, like heroin addiction. You can explain to them it's bad for them, but at the end of the day, it makes them feel good. They're going to go back to it.
Right.
They have to want to leave. Now, if it's an entirely different situation, if you have people who come to you and are like, hey, I'm involved in some stuff I want to get out of, help me. How do I get out of this? And of course the resources for that, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, of course, the most important thing is to like get them back to praying. The most important thing for them is to learn that they can ask God for forgiveness and they can ask for help and it will be given to them, and he will show them like how to get out of it.
Yeah.
And to have faith that he will put the people in their way to get them where they need to be, and we have to model that faith. Like we can't just be, I think sometimes there's too much emphasis placed on apologetics. I mean, not that it doesn't have its place, but there's too much emphasis placed on like this notion that we can just like reason with people and argue with people, and we like come up with the right set of arguments, we're going to get through to them.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, what as Christians, like the thing that gets through to people is by living like Christians. We have to love people, and we have to be willing to love people who are broken and who have done like incredibly bad things, and that's the real challenge for us, is that, I was actually telling somebody this just today, that, we have formal confession in our religion, in our denomination. And one of the things that like I never make an opportunity, like I never miss this opportunity when people come to me for confession, and they're like, bearing their soul and telling you like, really bad stuff. And people are broken. People are incredibly broken. And they want to, they need this, like they need like to bear their soul and like stuff off their chest, and they need to hear that they're forgiven of it. But they're also terrified to do it because there's somebody else now that's going to hear this. And at the end of the day, everybody is terrified for anybody else to know about their sins because they're afraid that they're not going to be loved after that.
Right.
You're going to hate me because I'm so disgusting and awful and broken.
Right.
Every single time somebody comes to me for confession, at the end of it, I grab them and give them a hug and tell them that I love them.
Yeah.
Because that's like the most, literally as Christians, that's the most powerful thing that we have, is like we have to radically demonstrate the love of Christ.
Right.
And there's not a single person in the gospel that the Lord interacts with that he doesn't like show love to. Even when he's rebuking the Pharisees, he's doing it out of love.
Yeah.
He's not there to like score apologetics points. He's wanting them to like come to their senses and realize that they're like wrong.
Yeah.
And but you see with like people that come to him that are broken, whether it's whether it's the woman caught in adultery, whether it's like the various lepers, the blind man, like all these people, like Jesus responds to with compassion and love.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure that we respond to people that same way, and that these people who have gotten into like bad stuff and have done bad stuff, because a lot of these rituals involve like blood sacrifice.
Right.
You got to remember that like not all this stuff is like clean and clinical.
Yeah.
People don't, it's hard to admit that you've done you've done bad things.
Yeah.
And when we deal with people who are wanting to get out of it, they have to know that there is forgiveness and that there's love for them, and not just from theoretically from God, but from like the Christians that they encounter.
Yeah. It makes me think of that scripture, it's his kindness that leads us to repentance.
Of course. Nobody gets argued into repentance.
Yeah.
It's what causes people to like respond to God with repentance is to feel the opposite of like that demonic manifestation, where we realize that there's like that Jesus Christ like literally is in hypostatic love. Like he is love.
Right.
He is compassion. He is goodness. And like the experience of that, they may be as far away from God as possible. And you may be the only person that like is in any way mirroring that to them.
Right.
Which makes it all the more important to do that.
Yeah.
It's not enough for us to just, be able to, quote books at them or even Bible verses at them. But they have to know that like, no, there's a way back, because you're loved, and God loves you, and he wants you, he wants you for himself, and we want you,
Yeah.
I like that. And because first of all, I think that a lot of Christians boil the Great Commission down, the win souls and make disciples, to some kind of script, like, Romans Road, or, what, like you have all these little, and they're handy for remembering scriptures and remembering key points to share with people, but there's no script that's going to convince somebody to give their heart to Jesus.
Nope.
And I like what you said, that what made you think about it was him asking you, you hate Christianity, or how much do you really know about it? I think is the way you said
how much
it.
do you know? Yeah. Which the answer was nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. That was all the argument you needed. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, the challenge is just like, how much do you know? Like, what have you read? What have you read about, Christianity? What do you know about, like, historically about Christianity?
Yeah.
I'm sure that most people, I myself, you had bad experiences at like a youth group or something when you were like a teenager.
Right.
But like, that's an incredibly tiny, narrow slice of what Christianity actually is. And you probably need to judge it based on like the whole.
Yeah, you were forced to watch DC Talk and Newsboys music videos. And
Yeah,
like, if this is Christianity, I'm out.
Yeah,
that's
DC Talk was awesome,
almost
man.
literally my life.
Oh, bro, yeah, I grew up in the same 80s and 90s Christianity. I really don't know how I'm a Christian still, but God was there with me.
That's that's the real miracle.
Exactly.
Right.
That shows you how gracious God is. All the content the church was putting out in the 80s and 90s, he still saved people.
Sometimes
like Josh manages to fit that in all the time.
God, sometimes God does what he does in spite of us.
Exactly,
but it's better if we're like doing actually what Jesus says to do, which is if you love me, keep my commandments,
right.
and also do what I do. The example of like the suffering Savior who's meek and lowly, and has no place to lay his head, and like really radically loves and has compassion on everyone, because he sees in every other human being, like he sees us all as his brothers.
Yeah.
You know, he became one of us so that he could like fully understand what it is that we're going through.
Right.
And that includes these people, that includes people who are like lost in occultism. Like people feel powerless, and people feel like they have no control in their lives, and this gives them like some semblance of control.
Yeah.
And it's even as like something stupid as like, believing in like horoscopes and like lucky numbers and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that, even that, like that small element of like that superstitious stuff, like allows people to feel in control. That's why they do it. That's why they go back to it. And the reality is that it's very hard. I tell people this all the time, actually, that like of all of the things that Jesus says, which are really hard to put into practice, probably the most difficult is Matthew 6:24-34, where Jesus says, "Take no thought for tomorrow." Not about what you're going to eat, not about what you're going to wear, really have absolutely no care for tomorrow, that the Lord will take care of you. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all of these things that you need will be added unto you. Yeah. And like, we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I circling back a little bit to my talk about Tracy Twyman, she wrote this brilliant book on money as magic. And like the notion of like the whole reason why fiat currency systems continue to work is that people invest like this belief in these like symbolic, units of currency.
Right.
And that there's nothing to it. It's all basically like it's basically like an occult transaction.
Yeah.
There's no real actual like goods being exchanged.
Right.
It's actually actually pretty brilliant assessment of sort of the world we live in, the economic world we live in.
Yep.
But think about how many people in your own life, and sometimes ourselves, like how often do we like try to use like wealth to work our will in the world, to establish ourselves in like some sort of peace and security, so that we don't actually need God, and that's why Christ says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. Because if you have the ability to like use money to like work your will in the world, it's really not any different than not all that different than doing magical rituals to work your will in the world.
Wow.
That's why he says, that the other god that the Jews loved to worship besides Moloch was Mammon.
Mammon.
Right, exactly.
And those two things are also always together, which gets us back to what we were talking about with like elites and wealth and power and occultism.
Right.
Yeah, I've thought about that several times, that a lot of people in the modern day just translate that as, you can't serve money or wealth and the Lord, but the word he uses is mammon, which is a spirit. Yeah. And this idea that the American dream, I have to acquire
the god of
more
luxury.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So I have to acquire more money so I can make more of these transactions to acquire something. It really does sound like
the real terrifying thing is like how deeply this stuff has this occult understanding of like God, and this like idolatrous understanding of God has like infected even Christianity.
Oh yeah.
Like people have this notion that I say this prayer and I'm like, God has to save me. I give my tithe, so God has to bless me. It's this like it becomes, as you just said, transactional, which is the essence of like occultism.
Right.
It's literally transactional behavior.
Yeah, he becomes a divine Santa Claus instead of God.
Well, even that, he's more of a divine vending machine. You put in prayer, you get the thing.
Yeah.
Well, and that is that classic definition of idolatry,
Well, Ryan, what else do we have?
Yeah, come on, I'm having a great time.
Yeah, free time?
All right,
okay.
Dungeons and Dragons, where are we?
Okay, so I actually do have a question, because based on what we were just talking about, because Josh and I both come from like kind of a charismatic background,
Okay.
We go to like a non-denominational, very large church, modern worship services. and they believe in praying in tongues and all that stuff. So very stereotypical charismatic modern church. So we don't have that background in like the liturgy and the ritual and stuff that the Orthodox Church has. So from that perspective of somebody that doesn't have that in their background, I'm curious. You talked about how in Satanism, things are transactional, and you follow these steps written down in this book, and you get some result or whatever. And we see that on the Christian side, there's also ritual that's performed as worship to Christ. And so I'm kind of wondering two things, like, do you think that there's any connection, like you mentioned before, that what the devil does is a flip or a reversal of what the Lord does? And again, I'm kind of asking all this out of ignorance because I didn't come from a Catholic or Orthodox background.
No, absolutely. And I often tell people I feel like I have like a unique perspective on this because I literally like swap teams.
Right. Right.
So. No, absolutely. Like, absolutely, that's the case. Because human beings, and whether or not, and this is true of like, everything that human beings do, like in worship. Now, whether or not it's like defined as like, this is the liturgy, I think you find, like, if you sort of step back and look like broadly at your, whatever your communion's like sort of worship expression is, like that it follows a pattern,
right?
Like there's a pattern to that, and of course ritual is just a pattern. There's ritual in the Old Testament,
right?
Even before the law, there's like Noah, like the first thing after he gets out of the ark is he gathers 12 stones from like the different from the different corners and builds an altar and sacrifices to God, and in Thanksgiving. So like there's an order to worship, right? No matter what that order is, like that order exists, and that right. Order to worship is literally just all ritual is. And so, but for us, obviously, like we have a sort of probably a more sacramental view of this kind of stuff. But I would say that in my experience, I can't imagine like anything greater than being able to serve the divine liturgy. I'll tell you this: like I have come to understand since being a priest, that's like the last 3 years. I understand Revelation better now than I ever did before, because all of the stuff that it talks about in St. John's Apocalypse. All of that stuff is present in our services. They're all present as like ritual actions, even like him talking about seeing like the 7 spirits of God in the lampstand. Like there's literally like behind my altar, like there is in every Orthodox church, there's like a 7-branch candelabra, that's like literally, I'm literally staring at like this like flame of like 7 flames, around the altar where like, Christ is. So like it in a real way, like, drives home to me like the reality of like what's going on, and that and to see that, like, sort of circling back to something I said, probably going an hour ago now, that like human beings are programmed to respond to image and to symbol. Like that's how God designed us.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons why for us, like, the symbolism of the ritual, the symbolism of the liturgy is so paramount, because it goes beyond, what I can teach people, in a sermon. It connects with people on like that sort of instinctive, like most basic level that God created human beings. So, which is why like it becomes, I've seen like absolutely beautiful things in the church, serving at the monastery. We go over, a few times a year, especially on their like feast day. And something that always strikes me, there's this like I'm not exactly sure what exactly condition he has. Boy is like incredibly disabled. He's like he's nonverbal. He's like completely nonverbal. His parents are very faithful. They bring him to church like every single time the doors are open, and he's often sort of very like sort of difficult. But like during the divine liturgy, he's like enraptured. Like he's just like taking it all in. And it's like, if there's anything that like shows you that like that's like there's something about like the image and the symbol that like connects to people on like a deeper level. I mean, like he here's a kid who like literally can't comprehend verbs. He can't comprehend language.
Right.
But he's totally like enraptured and like attentive to God.
Yeah.
For like this hour and a half, and
That's awesome.
talking to his parents, he probably can't, probably doesn't like sit still for an hour and a half any other time, but like but because we are designed that way, and because like these things do communicate like something about God's grace to us, like a very like basic like internal level, like it cuts through the need for this idea that like everything has to be discursive, everything has to be like through reason. I mean, even talking like going back to talking about circling back to the Inklings, like in that the second of like C.S. Lewis's space trilogy books, like there's that long like series of like dialogues between him and the Unman.
Dude, the
right?
Unman was brutal.
And and he's like, and he's losing the argument.
Yeah.
And like he finally like comes to the conclusion he just has to end this. Yeah. And it's not going to be ended through like out reasoning his opponent. He literally has to go and like sock him in the mouth and like stop him from being able to speak.
Right.
And then they have like the epic climactic battle, all the way down through the center of the mountain or whatever. But there's sort of echoey of Gandalf the Balrog.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
but like there's this.
I love that you brought that up. Everybody knows Narnia, but nobody really knows his space trilogy that well. But man,
it's far better work.
So good. Yeah.
Incredibly better. I would say C.S. Lewis's best book is That Hid His Strength. It's probably absolutely his best novel.
Yeah.
And it's also the one that's the least like his other works.
Very much. It's
but
wild.
it's wild. Yeah. And but like that's the sort of thing that people don't realize that I think a lot of times we put too much emphasis on like this like reasoning and apologetics when what we really have to do is live it and present this stuff to people. Not just necessarily I mean, it's easy to think about symbol as part of like ritual, which it is, but like we also like we have to like symbolically represent Christ. Like we have to mirror his behavior to people. We have to like mirror his life to people. Like language we would use, you have to be the primary icon that people see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what being the image is, huh? We are the image of God. Paul calls us his ambassadors, and that's all over in the scripture.
We're made in his image and likeness, and we have to recover that image in ourselves.
Yeah.
And like that's the work of being a Christian, is that we have to like purge sin out of our life so that original image can shine back through, so that people can see the image of God in our lives. And if we're not doing that, then again, all the brilliant argumentation in the world is going to do absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got to say, that's one thing that I find very just beautiful and moving about the Orthodox Church, because just over the past year or so, I've become more familiar with it. And Josh and I were introduced to it really because we found that podcast, Lord of Spirits.
Nice.
Had really, it's one of those things where a lot of Christians, or I guess in our circles, it's kind of like, yeah, we know Orthodox Christianity is a thing, but nobody really knows what it is.
Yeah. So, I mean, we describe ourselves off a lot of times as like the best kept secret in America.
Yeah.
Like, I had a guy come, not too long ago to my parish. It was like, I had no idea that like, you guys like existed here. Like, I just thought that like, you guys with like long beards and like robes were like just how like weird Catholics looked in Europe. And I'm like, yeah, that's no, like we're a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right here in Alabama.
Right here in Alabama, right? Sort of hometown boy, like with an Orthodox mission here in his hometown,
Yeah.
And people are like blown away that like there's something in Bessemer, Alabama. There's just like Orthodox church, and I'm like, we're everywhere,
Yeah. Hallelujah.
But yeah, no, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Like people need to see that representation, and now you're talking about like. Again, like one of the reasons that like drew me to Orthodoxy, that was one of the questions you guys had on the list. There's like this compendium of like case studies in like all of this stuff. Like there's not a single thing in like the sort of demonic repertoire that some saint of the Orthodox Church hasn't like written down about from personal experience of dealing with in the last 19, 20 centuries.
Right.
Like literally, like there's like volumes and volumes and volumes of like, saints' lives and their writings and like the stuff that they struggled with and the temptations they dealt with and different like delusions of the devil. And it's like, yep, seen that, dealt with that. Yeah, and it's like not only that like do they know that these things exist, but they like have a like here's how you overcome them, And so it was like this for me. It was just huge like there's like so there's people who have like this like knowledge of this stuff, and they have like it's like serious like practices that can help you like deal with it. Okay, that sounds interesting. Let me read more. Let me go visit one of these places. Nobody was more shocked than me to find out that there was like at the time, an Orthodox mission in Tuscaloosa. I moved back to it. I moved back to Alabama after I got home from college, and I was like, Tuscaloosa, Alabama has like an Orthodox church. Like what? So, showed up and, I was going to visit around all of the ones in like the Metro Birmingham area. And I stayed there for 8 years,
Yeah. And see, that's one thing that I think us as Protestants, I think some of the fault of Protestants is, I think after the Reformation, we swung so far the other way. For me, it's kind of a coming back to the middle of like, I was taught that ritual and tradition and all that stuff was something that we want to do away with. And it's like, man, like that's what Christianity was like meant to do. Like we're meant to carry on this tradition.
The word tradition gets translated a bunch of different ways into it's in Greek. It's paradosis is that word. And it gets translated like different ways in like English translations. Mm-hmm. It seems to be like there's a little translation bias in the English language. Probably, because whenever it's referred to in like a negative sense, it gets translated as tradition. When it's referred to in a positive sense by St. Paul, it's teaching. Which is there's a little translator bias there. I feel like sometimes, but like that word parodosis, that word originally comes from the Olympics. It's the baton race. That's the action of handing a baton to the next runner.
Right.
Wow.
Okay.
And so when Paul talks to Timothy and says, I have handed on to you that which I also received. Like that's like for us, that's like the definition of what the tradition is.
Right.
Like we have a responsibility to hand it on, what we have received. We have a responsibility to hand that on to the next generation.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
And there's something valuable about that. There's something like, there's something, I sometimes deal with sometimes with Protestants, and I feel like, talking to them, and it's like, so many of them feel like they have to figure out everything on their own. Like everything is like up to them to like work out, what have I got to do? Like, well, I'm saved, but like, what do I do now?
Right.
Right. And it's like, yeah, for them, I'm like, yeah, I didn't really have that, come in, I've now been Orthodox longer than I was like ever a Protestant. And I've been like out of that world since I was like, 11, 12. So like, I have no clue, sort of what's going on there or like how that works. But,
we're doing all right.
For me, yeah, but like, I find in like conversations with people that it's just like, a lot of times they're like dealing with like, they feel like this like crushing weight of like, I have to figure everything out and I have to like, I have to read like, all this stuff and I have to figure out what it means. And it's like, yeah, there's like a dummies book for that. Like that's weird. That's our tradition,
Yeah.
Like, I feel very comfortable in that. Like, I don't have to figure out what, all this stuff meant because people a lot smarter and a lot holier than me have like already worked out a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm like, a lot of times it seems like, people are like, wow, you're like really versed in like everything. I'm like, no, I'm just like, I'm an ant standing on the shoulders of giants.
Right.
Who, that's why I appear tall. But no, I got nothing really. I mean, like my understanding of stuff is like that. But I have a wealth of things to draw on. I have a wealth of like experience to draw from that I trust. Because it's consonant with like my own experience and my limited sort of spiritual experience in the church. But like those things are all consonant with what that is. So I have no reason not to trust it.
Right.
And so for me, that it's in some ways it takes a great weight off of people sometimes.
Yeah.
To realize that like oh, I'm not stuck like trying to figure out like how to get out of like this besetting sin, or I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
there's like a, there's like examples of people, of holy people who have like transcended those exact things that you're dealing with,
Right.
and here's how they did it. So
Yeah.
not only is it like hopeful to people that like, oh, I can get out of this, but like, oh, here's how they did it, and it would probably work if I did that too.
Yeah.
You know,
What does the scripture say? Like, we're surrounded by a great cloud of
cloud of
witnesses.
witnesses.
Yeah.
You
You
know,
know,
we have a lot
uh,
to draw on.
yeah, and that's, for us that that shows up so literally in our churches because we have the iconography, and we
Yeah.
have those great cloud are like sort of in a way physically present with us, like
You
we
have
see them,
a
so we
present
remember them.
reminder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a present reminder, and like that we're not alone, and that when we come into the church, like, it's not just like us, like we're literally in the presence of like, Christ and his saints and his angels.
Right.
you know they're all there with us. And it's that's both humbling and also incredibly like hopeful and powerful.
It
I mean, you want to
is.
talk about something that actually makes people feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Is like realizing that no, you're like in the presence of like the actual divinity, and like all of these people who have made it,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
they're
I
there
mean,
for you, and they're waiting for you, and they want to help you, and they want to encourage you, and they're like cheering you on, like, no, you can do better, come on, get up and
right.
try
Right.
again.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know
That's how the church is supposed to be, for
Yeah.
sure.
yeah.
And that structure in history, I think, is definitely a a benefit that the Orthodox Church has over I think Protestant churches. That, like you said, the structure for accountability and history is not as deep, and so
Well,
um,
and that's again one of the reasons why I decided to do this today, guys, was that there's, because like most people don't even know that we exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's we do sort of have like this wealth of stuff to draw from, and these resources, and these like this sort of vast sort of spiritual tradition of experience, like compiled experience that people need to be made aware of, because
Yeah.
it's there. It's there to draw from. It's there to like look at. I know I started off this conversation talking about Saint Cyprian, the former sorcerer. There's a book that just came out about his life, from Scriptorium Press. It's available on Amazon. It's like 12 or 13 bucks. It's fantastic. It's a tiny little read, but it's like great. And I've been like recommending it to like a lot of my young guys at the parish. Like this is some solid stuff. I know you guys are like all interested in like apologetics and wanting to like argue people on the internet, but like maybe you should think about reading some of this stuff.
That's awesome. So I guess we don't want to keep you all night long, but what to kind of close this out, we really wanted to talk about this stuff because we know that people will probably listen to the episode that are in Satanism, they're in the occult, they want to maybe get out, or there's somebody who has a loved one or a child that's stuck in this stuff. What would you say to them? How do I get out? How do I help a loved one that's stuck in this, a child or whatever it might be? What's the hope that you can give to them?
The answer for both of those things is prayer. I mean, like, the person who's involved in it, like, tonight, throw away your ritual implements and get on your knees and pray.
Yeah.
Ask God for help. Ask the Lord to send his angels to help you, and it will happen. I promise you, it will happen.
Yeah.
Like we don't realize. I mean, like I was just saying this, like we don't realize that, like, the scriptures tell us that there's more rejoicing in heaven over like one sinner that repents.
Yeah.
But like the reality is that it's not just that they're like rejoicing when we do it. They're there like waiting for us to ask for help. They're there waiting for us to like to try to help us and push us along that line,
Yeah.
so that we can get over the hump and like on the way. And so like the minute that you make the intention to like get out of it, and to think, hey, I maybe need to do something else, I needed to get out of this, right then is the time to act. Like don't put it off till tonight, don't put it off till tomorrow. Like strike while that iron is hot, and like and literally like get rid of your stuff and go ask God to forgive you and to help you and to send you where you need to be.
Yeah.
And he will do that because he's faithful and just to forgive our sins.
Amen.
And he absolutely will like send you where you need to be. And for somebody who's got loved ones involved in it, again, pray for that person. Even if they're like even if they're like so like mired in like whatever sins that they're in, and that they hate themselves and they hate God, and they're like not listening, and they're not going to listen. Again, if we pray and ask God to help that person, that gives him an excuse to get involved. You know, he's going to respect their free will not to want him, but he's going to respect your free will to ask for his help for that person. Yeah. And the thing that like the Lord responds to the most is like our love for one another. Yeah. You know, because that is in some ways the most Christ-like thing that there is. You know, that to realize that the Lord, you know, St. Paul tells us this, that, you know, while we were still sinners, he showed his love for us, that he laid down his life for us. Yeah. You know, and, you know, if you don't even have to go that far, you just have to, you know, be self-sacrificial enough to sometimes like sit there and patiently take their nonsense and pray for them all the more, and still love them. Because I again, like, I know it seems like I've sort of said this over and over, but like this stuff, people get into this stuff because they feel powerless and unloved. And you got to break that cycle. And the only way to do that is to love people.
Yeah. And that's another reason we wanted to invite people of different denominations and backgrounds on. Like, I think Christ is what binds us all. We might have different views on all this stuff, but, you know, I think Jesus is the answer. That's something we agree on for sure.
Well, I absolutely firmly and totally believe that if your orientation is toward the truth, that, you know, Christ is truth.
Amen.
And so if your orientation is toward him, he will make sure that you end up where you need to be.
Right.
You know, it's just your, you know, you just got to like get up and go. He'll make sure that you end up where you're supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. Amen. Man, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Ryan, what do you think?
I have a lot more questions, so maybe we can follow up.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to, you know, whenever you guys want to go. This has been great. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on and maybe go over some different topics too. That I love it.
If our listeners say, "Hey, we have some questions for you," we'll bring you back on and
yeah, that'd be cool.
Pass on their questions.
I'm fine with that. Absolutely fine with that.
Maybe you could be our sit-in father for our show. our go-to Father Justinian.
Well, you know, if it's God's will.
Yeah.
Amen.
For our listeners, if you enjoyed what you hear, go follow us on Instagram. But let's see, it's what, Behind the Curtain PC on Instagram.
I don't know. We're on the
internet
somewhere.
YouTube and TikTok, which we all hate, but we have to have it. YouTube and TikTok is BTC Mysteries. So go look us up. Share this with someone who you think would enjoy it. Talk to y'all next time.